Welcome to another episode of the Sales Catalyst podcast. Been a while, but we are back. I'm your host, Ari Barmapov. Here is my co-host, Zac Blakely. And today, for our return to the podcast scene, we have Alex Couture. Alex, welcome so much to the show. Really appreciate you being here with us today. For those of you who don't know Alex, go read a book. Go open up the internet. Like, what's wrong with you? But I'll give you a recap here nonetheless. Alex was in the first hiring group at CDW and was there throughout their massive North American expansion. Founder and CEO after that of SceneDoc, and it was acquired by Tyler Tech in 2018. And after that, he's advised for many startups and executives with a focus on business philanthropy in the tech community. Alex, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show here today.
It's an honor to be with you guys. Thanks for having me, Ari. Zac, good to see you, buddy.
Great to see you too, pal. I'm actually hitting up our favorite spot tonight. I'm going to Spencer's for my 5-year anniversary with the girlfriend.
Nice.
And, so it's very timely to have you on here. It follows our coincidental circumstances that seem to be favorable for us both.
Make sure you get some of those French fries.
Zac, my invitation must have gotten lost in the mail. I wasn't invited to be there with you.
For my anniversary?
Yeah.
What?
We're co-hosts. We do everything together. Come on.
We probably shouldn't talk about everything that we do together on the podcast. We should keep some of that for, personal, intimate times.
We'll keep that for the Catalyst After Dark.
Catalyst, yeah.
If y'all are interested.
That's a good ring to it. You guys should parlay this into that. Yeah.
A whole 15-second episode. Yeah.
That's how long you take?
Oh man. Well, listen, this podcast has been a minute, coming in here. It's, honestly, for those that don't know, one of our biggest privileges with this and in terms of making overtly sexual jokes, we're popping Alex's cherry today. Alex has never went down the path of a podcast, which is insane because anybody that knows Alex is like, this guy is literally an encyclopedia of knowledge, and and now he's finally willing to share it. So Alex, like, what tipped the scales, man? Why the Sales Catalyst podcast? Why are you breaking out of your shell now?
Honestly, I think it's you. I mean, if I can be truthful about it, I think it's like finding the right person to do it with, right?
On the trend of great jokes, yeah. Here we are.
No, dude, I think when I first met Zac, Ari, I don't know if he shared you this story, but in so many ways, he reminds me of the person I was. And what I mean by was is like just the level of energy he has. And I know all of you guys have this. You guys embody what sales professionals should look like. You guys are students of the game. You guys are putting in the work, and you act like your hair's on fire and your back's up against the wall. And I think that's ultimately how you win in this game. So I think that's what attracted me and got me so comfortable.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, I'm super excited to share some of this information that I found so valuable over to the rest of our audience too.
Very cool. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Let's jump into this.
Alex, I'm really, really curious. First thing that I wanted to ask you, and it's just burning a hole in the back of my mind. When it comes to being a founder and, having that really knitted into your DNA, how do you pick a great team? How do you pick who to go into business with, how to go and bring on, and just like, how do you choose who to work with?
Honestly, for me, I mean, I guess if we kind of go through the story of SceneDoc, obviously before we got through the team, a co-founder was imminent or critical. My co-founder, Adrian Bubalo, he was the idea guy. I'm not much of an idea guy. He was the one who had the vision for the product and, what it should do and how it should be used. And I'm more of an executionist type of guy. Again, it goes, I guess, a good segue on the comments I just made about Zac and yourself, Ari. Like, I'm the guy to go out and figure out how we're going to commercialize it. Who do we sell this to repeatedly? All that good stuff. But I think it starts with having a good co-founder. I always tell people that, if you're going to build a SaaS company, build a tech company, I think it's a really, really good idea to have a co-founder. I'm a pro co-founder type of guy. And that's because you need somebody who fills your gaps, somebody who can see around the corners you can't see through, somebody who can complement you. And I think if you can find a complementary co-founder, it can be really game changing.
So when you think about a complementary co-founder, and I think that's really interesting because a lot of the times that's how people think about co-foundership is find somebody that fills your gaps and you can work alongside that. Now that's very that sounds very good, but then when you mix it into technology companies and you take that distribution guy and you put him in the room with the tech guy, they fill each other's gaps, but they struggle to understand each other and they struggle to understand the value that each of them are creating for the business. And when I say I go out and I had a lunch meeting, they're like, I coded for 4 hours today. You know what I mean? And there's always this sort of like, you don't understand my world, I don't understand your world, but we're complementary. We fit so great. And there's so many organizations. You think Antler, you think all these different organizations that are really good at trying to take that jigsaw puzzle and put it together. But we know that like that's not really the whole key. There's got to be a communication. There's got to be a relationship level. There's got to be this deeper sort of meaning to what you're looking to do to hold you together. Because if you don't see each other's work as the same and you don't really realize all the time the value or the effort put into the other person's work, sometimes it can create a disparity in opinion. Right. So how do you think about, when you get that co-founder that fills those gaps, like what do you find the most successful founders have from a skill set perspective that lets them conquer those gaps rather than create a larger crevice between them?
Yep. So I think you said the word actually a couple times, and that's values. I think of it actually just like finding your life partner, right? Like, which oftentimes a co-founder is. Adrian and I would joke all the time that like he was my wife and I was his wife, and our husband, pick the word, right? Like we were each other's partners. Yeah, exactly. Like that's how much time we were spending together. So I would say that like the word that you said twice was value. I would say values, right? Like you need to focus on making sure you have shared values. I mean, I talk about this at length, at nauseum. Like you have to do your homework and ahead of time, like before getting into bed together as partners in business, you have to spend time making sure that your moral compass is aligned, making sure your value sets align. And Adrian and I spent a lot of time doing that, right? It was like and I think if you asked him, it would be that he was very deliberate and thoughtful about that too, right? Like we had conversations about our upbringings and childhood and, siblings and parents and how we were raised. All these things, by the way, I think are what defines your moral compass, right? Like the things that you value. And so like if your values aren't aligned early, they're going to come out when shit hits the fan. And you guys are building a business. You guys know this already. Right. Mm-hmm. There's going to be moments when shit hits the fan. There's going to be plenty of them. I mean, startup is littered. It's littered with moments of shit hitting the fan.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have that alignment at a fundamental level about what's important, then there's tremendous risk. And I think that's why a lot of co-founding relationships and partnerships in general in business go sideways. I'll tell you this quick little story that when I started Scene Doc, I had one of my only uncles who was a successful business guy had sent me a letter about why having a business partner was a bad idea. Like really, really a bad idea. He's like, you should do this alone. I'm not sure I've told this story to many people, but honestly, like, I mean, obviously I didn't listen, right? I went ahead with having a business partner. But I think it's like he's representative, and we've had this discussion now, many years later, that I think he's representative of many people in business, which is they don't take the time to like really get to understand their partner, their potential co-founders. And so I'd say front load that exercise early and often so that you guys can stay aligned as things get difficult.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing I take away from that's so valuable in context to us in our business is how we were all friends first, right? And actually, Ari and Elliot weren't, but I was close friends with both of them and have been for a long time. And knowing the kids, the relationships, the goals, the values, all these different things that we wanted, as things got tough, we actually came closer together. And which was, all predicated on that, what you talked about, that relationship, those values. What are we trying to do with this? Why are we trying to do this? What are we running from and what are we running to? And what are our drivers for both of those things? And then further to that, like, what's your lazy, right? Like, people don't talk about this. Like, what's your lazy? Like, when you show up, like, how much do you suck on a bad day? And how much do you deliver on a good day? And am I going to find out that you suck at the end of the day? Or are you going to be able to come in and be like, bro, I suck today, right? And are we going to be able to have that conversation? And can we fill those smaller, more interim gaps? Because we have the larger ones we're trying to accomplish, but we also know that every single day we're going to go into someone's high, someone's low, somebody needs to lead. And it needs to be this idea of like, similar to like, how I envision what you're saying is, I think of like, the people that you want to be in the trench with, right? Like, the idea is we're all stuck here. This is where nobody's going anywhere, right? And like, if two of us make it and you're a foundership of three, like, that's a failure, right? Like, all three people need to make it. And if somebody, their foot breaks, like, you got to wear them on your back, and then we'll figure out how we can share it until they're healthy and they can repay it. Like, you have to have that dynamic. And that's why it's so funny sometimes when I've had advice, which was like, don't start business with your friends. And I'm like, I couldn't disagree more. Like, I literally could not possibly disagree more, because I know that the difficulty that I've went through in entrepreneurship, I don't know that I'd be able to cross that bridge if I didn't have a strong relationship and a friendship there when things got really tough. Just kind of like a relationship, the way you described it. Like, you want to get somebody that'll be there when you take that risk and will do those things because you're on a journey together, not like you're on a journey in two parallel lines. As long as you're like, both pointing the same direction, then it's a journey together. But like, you can easily have deviation, right? You got to be one symmetric, or I guess
it's certainly not binary, whether you're friends or you're not friends. Again, it goes back to the foundation of, do we have deep respect for each other? Do we want the same things? Are we going to, demonstrate love, quite frankly? I mean, I know it sounds mushy, but like,
not at all. You need to.
You have to
show
have
respect
that
and
love for each other. And I think that that's why people say you shouldn't do this with friends, because they think all those things are going to get in the way, but they're only going to get in the way if you don't have value alignment. If you have value alignment, I think it'll set you free.
Definitely.
It just keeps you on track.
I'm going to tell a story of a very famous influencer, and Zach's about to roll his eyes, but he doesn't have to worry, because I'm not going to be bringing up that person. I'm going to be bringing up a different person.
Okay.
This is actually a
It was going to be
story.
Alex Hormozy, and then last minute he changed and thought of somebody else. That's how we got here.
It's not that way. It's actually something that Simon Sinek said.
Oh, I love Simon Sinek.
And Simon Sinek was talking about when you have a friend who's going through a shit time and it's completely horrible, and that person is in the mud. The worst thing that you can do for that person is to extend your hand and pull them up out of the mud.
Mm.
They won't appreciate it, they won't like it, and they'll think that you're giving them a handout. The way to handle that situation is to get down, sit in the mud with that person, and say, yep, this sucks. And just sit there right beside that person.
Lead with empathy. Yeah. Be right there beside them, understand their shoes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And it's I just absolutely love that analogy when it comes to being with a founder that you care about.
Yeah.
It's someone that you're more than happy with. Just sit down in the mud with and be like, yeah.
At least we're here together.
At least we're here together.
Yeah.
This sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's the empathy and the caring part, right? I mean, you mentioned it earlier, Zach, like, one co-founder is coding for 4 hours, one went to 3 lunches. It's easy to like be like, it was a lot easier being at the 3 lunches. But, like, again, if you bring it back to like the respect of what each other does, the art and the science behind what each of us will do throughout the journey, then you'll always just respect it. Right? Like, I actually think this actually makes me, it's reminiscent of a story like in year 2 or 3 at CDW, actually, like really early in my career. Our GM and president at the time, Marianne Yule, she had asked me to like talk to the new cohort salespeople that were hired. And I would always get the question, hey, Alex, it must be really nice to be out on the golf course like 3 days a week, right? And because they have no understanding that most of the time you're spending 5, 6 hours on a golf course, drinks or dinner after. And quite frankly, sometimes you're not with people that you want to be with for
Yeah.
7 hours, right?
Yeah.
And that's really hard work. And it takes a lot of mental stamina to be able to do that over and over again. And I think it just comes, I mean, just bringing it back to this story is that sometimes if you don't have the respect, you don't have the awareness, and you're not appreciative of that thing, again, values will derail you on being able to appreciate what your other co-founder and teammates are doing. Like,
Yeah.
that's so important.
Yeah.
To have that
Yeah.
respect.
And
Absolutely.
while we're on the Simon Sinek topic, another thing that he always talks about is like, look at he gives the downhill skier analogy, right? This is one of the ones that I really love. And he talks about, why downhill skiers are successful. Like there's all of these obstacles around them. Like at any time, if they missed a line and, made the wrong edge, they could be right into a tree. But what they do is they train themselves. They literally do not see the trees. They only see the path and they stare at the path. And I think that in entrepreneurship, as a solo entrepreneur, that's very, very, very difficult to do. You can do it. But I would also argue a lot of the people that do it might have an amazing support network behind them and relationships and all those other things that make it easier for them to replicate this. But there's some support from somewhere for them to be able to stay really focused on that path. And having a co-founder and building a path with them and then holding each other accountable to that during those turbulent ups and downs, ebbs and flows. Like I definitely couldn't do it without Ari. And we talk about this all the time. And we talk about it with Elliot as well. Like, Elliot, when he joined, it's a fundamental component of our business. And we talk about what we deliver for our clients. We're like, we could not do it without the three of us. We could not. So all of us are absolutely pertinent to this vision and the vision we've built. Now it's like, stay focused on that. And we all just recognize the roles. Who's the person at the top that's preparing the skis? Who's the person that looks like they're maybe in charge, the downhill skier, but the person that ultimately is taking the biggest risk? And who's the coach in the background that's training that mentality? And how do we fill those roles as we recognize they're all winners, right? And maybe one person might look like they're the winner, but there's a team of winners behind that. And that's when you adopt that mentality, it's really important. And I loved sports for that. Sports was a really good job at teaching you your role, and your ability to fulfill that role was just more important to the team than it was to yourself. And learning that is a really important part of business.
Very, very
Well
important.
said.
And
Yep.
I mean, to wrap that part up, when you're choosing a co-founder, the most important part over there is to just make sure that the two of you are complementary. People who have the exact same values or very, very similar values. And when shit hits the fan, you need to know exactly who's the person who's going to be standing beside you. If there isn't that baseline of trust, it just won't work.
Yeah.
And that segues us really, really nicely into our second topic of everyone can learn from everyone. And, we all need to be students. We all need to be teachers. And, there's a lot of very important reasons on why we embrace that. I think talking about co-founders, that's actually a very nice transition into how co-founders learn from each other and build upon each other's skill sets.
Yeah.
How are you and your co-founder different, Alex? And how did you guys learn from each other?
We were actually, I was gonna just say that we were complete opposites. In some ways, we were similar. I mean, he was very business savvy. So, although he initially started serving as our CTO and then COO, he was extremely business capable. He wasn't just a propelling head type of product guy / engineer. But how are we different? I think that. So there was ebbs and flows, like in any business, right? Where there was times where like we needed to be deep in the weeds, and then there was times where we had to work on the business. And I would say that there was times where that created conflict, right? Because we were different in how we approach those things. So you raise the thing that I say to all my teams, which is like everybody's a student and everybody's a coach. I think actually goes back to like a value thing too, though.
Totally.
Is that if everybody's a coach and everybody's a student, actually, the differences we have in our personalities and how we execute are less obvious because everybody is now, in this place where they're authentically sharing information and experiences and the lessons they've learned, but they're also very, very coachable. So they're able to take feedback in. They're able to take those lessons that were learned and shared with them, and to integrate them quickly. And I think that speeds up, just team, right? Like, quite frankly, I actually used this at a company called Kumu, where I was serving as SVP of global sales. We were completely rebuilding the sales organization, and there wasn't enough layers between the staff we had and me at the top of the sales organization and all the sellers. And so the only way for me to actually ensure that the team could scale properly was to culturally build into the fabric of the team that everybody was a coach and everybody was a student. And that started with me too, right? Like, I'm learning from them as much as they might be learning from me, but there's this constant exchange of information where we all get to grow. And just bringing this back, Ari, to your question, like, what were the big differences? While there's certainly differences, they're less noticeable because we're moving quickly and we're iterating quickly and we're learning quickly and we're sharing information quickly. Everybody's picking each other up. I think that was the gold in the team we were building at Kumu.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that, two things in there that I think of is, like, I think of, everybody being a teacher and everybody being a student or a coach, however you want to call it, teacher or coach, is, this osmosis environment. And the fact that when you put people in environments where you enable them to and empower them to learn and pass their knowledge down and fail forward, be understanding that for us to learn something, we're gonna have to fail. And as entrepreneurs, like, I mean, damn, like, we learned that was the reason why, when I got asked, why did you start your business? Like, you could have continued to go down the path of working in enterprise sales, making a bunch of money, not working a huge amount. And, like, you could go down that path, but why didn't you? And my big thing that I came out of, and even in our meetings when we spoke, was just like, I want the freedom to make a decision, live with it, see if it works or if it fails, and then learn from that. Because in a lot of my other roles, I felt like I was learning from decisions I didn't make that I thought shouldn't have been made. And then I didn't learn anything and I had to do something I didn't want to do. And that was frustrating. And so for me, when you think about a lot of salespeople, they're naturally going to be entrepreneurial at heart. And they're naturally going to have talents they're going to want to share to other people. And they're going to have things that they need to be able to learn. And it brings me to another sort of quote and thing that I think of, which I actually got from my ex's mom. It was the best advice I actually think I've ever received in my life. She said, "Be very careful to judge people for their shortcomings because it's often a reflection of their biggest strength." So when you think about sometimes stubbornness, people can be really frustrated with people that are stubborn, but they also love how their stubbornness will allow them to succeed forward, not get stopped, see the path, not the trees, and there's so many different examples of that. Ambition, passion, it has an ugly head and it has a positive head. And if you can put people in an environment where you say, hey, listen, I love you for this, and I'm going to let you continue to thrive on this and drive your passion or whatever that it is, we're going to encourage that. And we're actually going to encourage other people to learn from that. But you got to understand that you at the same time have to be willing to learn from other people so that this is a reciprocal relationship. And when you set that up, these are those organizations that, maybe not so much anymore, but you'd think HubSpot probably did a really good job at that. You'd think Salesforce probably did a really good job at that. When they exploded massively and all the people that came out of there, all their SVPs went off to lead all of the other huge companies. And it's because they all came together, they all built on their strengths, they all learned from each other, filled those gaps, had the ego to be the coach, but also could reduce it and be humble enough to get that teaching. And in entrepreneurship, you're just forced to go down that path. And so I think that idea that you introduce into all these sales teams of be a coach, but also be a learner is just not only paramount to selling, but to entrepreneurship and foundership, and really just honestly how you think about a lot of components of your life when you look at how to learn, what you can give and what others can give you, which is super important.
It removes the hierarchy too, right? Like it removes the hierarchy. Like in large companies to which I've worked at, you want to flatten the organization as best as you can so that we can again accelerate. in startup, you need to be like that, right? Like you can have hierarchy. And so like actually the cultural component of everybody being a coach and everybody being a student um, actually is only, it's actually more important in a startup, where if you can build that into the culture of the startup early, everybody's going to move quicker, right? And because that's at the end of the day, that's how I think about this thing. This thing that we're talking about for me is a velocity creator. How do you build momentum?
Mhm.
And I think that when everybody can be vulnerable and take in coaching and learn and share, that's where velocity is created.
Yeah. And I mean, it's easy to say it, Alex. It's easy to come in and say, hey, everybody's a coach, everybody's a teacher. We're going to flatten out. This is what it's going to look like. But how do you actually do that in application? Like, how do you practice that? How do you walk into an organization that maybe wasn't founded with those morals, right?
Yeah.
Their founder wasn't, we'll call it, maybe savvy enough from a soft skill perspective to think that way. How do you go in and flatten it back out and make that become a thing? Do you have to transition the team out? Can you, like, how do you think about going into
Sometimes, but I think it
organizations?
starts with the leader, right? Like everything starts with the leader, right? It starts with you guys. You guys are running your company. You guys demonstrate leadership. And so it starts with like being vulnerable, being transparent, admitting when you fuck something up. Right? Like admitting when you don't know something. I was in a conversation with somebody yesterday when we were building SceneDoc. Our primary user group were police.
Yeah.
And my first VP of sales, Michael, he taught me that when you're speaking to cops, Alex, there's really three answers to a question they pose. And it's yes, no, I don't know. Let me get back to you. Right? Never fib. Like be truthful 100% of the time. And I think that's how you break the glass, break the ceiling, whatever
Mm,
metaphor you want to use. That's how you do that quickly. So like
nice.
when we enter into an organization, when I've been doing all this fractional work, I'm doing that very, very quickly. And by the way, the more you can be transparent and vulnerable, the quicker you establish trust.
Yeah,
Right. And the
100%.
quicker we establish trust, the quicker we can invoke change, the quicker we can make the adaptations to the business so that we can accelerate again. Everything again for me comes back to how do we move quicker than we are right now? How do we move smarter than we are right now?
Yeah, that's
That
that's
if that
awesome.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that as a
That's a great
and
way to wrap it up. Yeah.
yeah, it is.
It's that, feedback, it speeds up everything exponentially. Going back to what you said, Zach, when you have a collaborative osmosis like environment with that, everyone wins, and it makes failing a lot more acceptable so that
Yeah.
everyone learns together and
And that
everyone gets better
yes,
together.
no, and I don't know, like I love that. Like from an actual, this is how we're going to handle things moving forward. Like when I ask a question, it's cool if you don't know, that is cool. I'm asking you for a reason.
Be straight with
You
me.
be straight with me. That's going to allow me to move forward. That's a really, really simple way to be like, this is how this operates. And then that starts to fester that environment. I love that as like an actual execution takeaway. You're so smart, Alex.
Yeah.
Well, smart.
You're so smart.
But you know what makes you the smartest? Is the fact that you give, 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 and when you're done giving, you give more. And that's just something that is so unbelievably ingrained in you. And it's
Yeah.
one thing to have high IQ, but having that high EQ, I think, is just as important. How's that suited you in business?
Well, I mean, I guess there's enough documentation and people writing about kindness to know that like being kind helps you win. I think it's such an overlooked thing in practice, though, right? Like we read all this stuff, like anything on LinkedIn, where there's all this stuff, a lot of advice floating around. But
No shortage of it.
being nice, being kind, coming from a place of empathy. I talk about that from a sales perspective, but also outside of sales, right?
Totally.
Like being empathetic. You hit it earlier, Zach. Like that's what it's about. And so, like, yeah, for me, that's manifested now into this concept of Dana, into in my wife's mother tongue of Hindi. Dana means to give, and honestly, there was like something physical in my body on December 8th, the day after my company was acquired. And I knew that the next chapter of my journey would be about helping other people, particularly SaaS founders, tech founders, first time CEOs not make the mistakes I made, because Lord knows I could write 5-6 books on the mistakes I made. And so the thesis was all about, helping others avoid the mistakes and pitfalls and missteps, all those things that I did. Because I think if we can avoid one or two of those mistakes, again, it goes back to acceleration. You get to grow faster, right? All these mistakes just end up being speed bumps, right? They all slow you down. And so I think now that's been my mission, right? Over the last few years, and that's been manifested in this concept of giving in a few ways. We're advising, we're doing fractional work, and all of that has been fun. But actually, it's bringing me now to this next phase of how I want to accelerate the giving, as it relates to tech founders. And now I'm thinking about how I scale that beyond me, right? Like the last 2 years has been a great journey of me being able to help, subset of, call it a couple dozen CEOs and startups avoid some of these mistakes. Now I'm really deeply thinking about how we do that at scale, right?
Yeah.
And as we do that at scale, how do we help? I hate the word democratize, but like, how do we make it easier for founders anywhere in the world to get the access they need? Right. What I mean by access is access to people, access to information, access to advice, access to good investors, good human beings that can support them. And what I found over these last few months is that there are founders outside of the Valley and great cities like Toronto, where we have great ecosystems, that are starving and screaming for support and help. And there's this also interesting that happens with those types of founders, in that if we're able to get their startups off their ground, their ideas into reality, it's not only impacting them as entrepreneurs, but oftentimes an entire community that relies on them and behind it. And that to me is like, I think, going to be my next wave of impact, is like, how do I give my expertise and time and my network to helping founders like that?
That's awesome. And I mean, I love where you're going with it. Obviously, I have some insider knowledge on where you're going, and I absolutely love the path. But you talk about a bunch of really just great things in there. But from something that I want to ask is, I know we've talked about this a bunch. We're both very privileged to have fathers that we respect to an absolute tremendous amount, that both of us would probably argue are major cornerstones in any version of our development throughout the years. And I know that your dad was a massive giver and proponent of giving and all of those different things, and coached you in a lot of those different ways. But I find a lot of giving is intrinsic. Like, there's a lot of people that they learn it from their parents, and then, their parents don't enforce it, and it kind of disappears. And there has to be a passion behind it. And for me, like, the reason why I ask you this question, I think might even be a little bit, I guess, introspective for me, is that I think about, like, being a young person. I was always trying to do that. If I would ever get asked a question, I would always want to give you as much information as possible as to try and help you. That was always how I was. And I never really understood it. And then as I, got more familiar with pay it forward and the idea of, if I can help somebody, and then, we can start creating a better network community for ourselves to pass information down, and started to see the reciprocity of it, this, that, and another thing. Like, somewhere along the lines, you learn that and you practice that. And in your younger life, like, was that something that you recognized was just naturally ingrained in you, and something that, or maybe something specific that you did consistently that, you look back and reflect on now, where you're like, that was probably the beginning of where I started to get really interested in that concept of whatever I have, like, I want to try and give it to you. If you're going to, I don't want to say pay attention to me, but if you genuinely care and genuinely mean it, like, I'm fully invested. And even if I found something that helped me in my day to day, I was like fully invested on sharing it to everybody in my life, so everybody knew, so everybody could try and get the same win I had. A lot of people don't have that, and I'm curious to you, is like, now you're amplifying that massively. Like, this passion has to be very, very, very deep. So I'm just curious about, like, when you thought maybe you started that practice, and how maybe it transcended its way into ultimately your business manifestation of philanthropy. But mansplation.
Stop
Those are really,
mansplaining
really good
manifestations to me.
Shut up,
question. um, honestly, like I mean, we could spend hours talking about my parents and the selflessness and how they grew up. I mean, I guess a typical immigrant story. I don't know, but dad came here by himself at 17 on the heels of a uncle he had who was a priest. It's like a crazy story about how the priest, secured a home for my dad with a Dutch family who I believe had 10 kids of their own in Ottawa. So they took in this little brown boy from a small village in the south of India as like a 10th or 11th child. I think dad's entire life was predicated on somebody giving to him. Right? I mean, that's probably the crux of this, right? Like, so, that's been a huge lesson for my older brother and my older sister and me as the youngest, certainly. Like, our whole family is here living a great life in Canada, and his cousins and many siblings that he has are in the US, and we're all here living a fantastic life because of, well, my great uncle, who God rest his soul, his giving, his foresight to pitch this idea and figure out a path for my dad to come to Canada. And then it's been this series of my dad paying that forward, right? My dad has brought in a litany of people over to Canada and to the US. And so like that sense of giving has been a cornerstone to our whole family's existence.
Yeah.
And so like, honestly, I got to tell you, when you actually bring this out of me, like, this pales in comparison. This is nothing. Like, what I'm doing is easy work.
Yeah, it's true.
Easy. This is easy stuff,
listen,
right?
Man,
I
don't know, man. I don't know. I'm going to challenge you on that.
But
I got to challenge you on that.
This is what I'm supposed to do, right? This is what I'm supposed to do, right? Like when our parents went through what they went through, like we're supposed to win this game. We're supposed to be in a position to help others. And I think that like that's what we're going to go out and do. And guess what? As much as you talk about it from a philanthropy perspective, and yes, some of this work that I do is pro bono, but make no mistake, there's a win-win for everybody, right? And I think that's how good partnerships are, by the way, right? Like the thing around compassion fatigue. I don't know if you know this concept.
Yes.
You care so much about somebody or something. Like there's a fatigue, there's a point of fatigue, and there's a point where you will stop. And I think that like in order to avoid that, the way you avoid that is through making these partnerships and the work you do a win-win. So I will win. It may be protracted. It might be extended. I'm going to play a long game. I've always been a student of playing the long game. And that's what we're going to do. But guess what? In that process, people are going to be impacted. Lives are going to be impacted. We're going to create liquidity for founders that deserve it. And a whole bunch of people around them will win too, much like my dad and mom did for us and the way I'm winning now.
Yeah. Well, listen, I will, like I was saying, I will challenge you a little bit on, I totally agree. I totally agree that everything that your dad did, like that story is exceptional. And like, this is the reason why, we have a lot of amazing immigration stories in Canada, and it's sadly less of an opportunity than it once was at this point. But it's, it's great to see a country that was predicated on those successes. But, you have reached your level of success. You've done things that allow you to carry on. You can continue this fractional work. You can say, oh, I'm going to take this bag. I'm going to continue to work for these big organizations, right? And there'll be an impact. I'm making an impact, right? And I can contribute to charity, like all those other things. But to be like, listen, no, I'm going to try and find the founders that aren't getting help. I'm going to try and create a community to get to those people. I think that one of the things that you have to understand is like, even when you found us as a business and as an organization, just the impact of a lunch and a conversation could change my kid's future, my kid's future. It could change
butterfly effect on
future.
that is
Yeah. And so when
Surmountable.
you think about what you're doing, like yes, there's absolutely a transaction. I completely agree. But the path in which you're choosing is so clearly driven by passion and your willingness to find anybody and everybody that you can give opportunity to. And you've proven that in other examples in your life, that it is something that you can consider philanthropic. And it is something where right now, especially in North America, with the way that venture capital predatory environments have been built, the way that all of these other things have been set up with this, what you talk about, saying you don't like to say democratization of data and information, but it's becoming less and less available. It's more and more gated. It's harder to get to it. You need more and more critical advice that costs a lot of money. Very hard to do for a small founder that's trying to break out, or in a sales role where they're losing 50 cents on the dollar, can't afford to build a lifestyle they want. They got to go try and start something. They're doing everything they can and they're desperate for advice. You going out and trying to find those people and make a community to find those people and make an impact on those people, dude, to think that that's not very similar to the idea that a Dutch family bringing in a small Indian boy from overseas to be able to give opportunity to him, he could have chose a life that never gave back to anybody. He could have chose that, like many other people did, right? So again, challenging you on that, because sometimes I don't think you realize it, that you do have a massive impact and from a philanthropic perspective, and your willingness to go out and find more of it is not something that people are going to look at as like, that's like a business transaction. As soon as they get to understand who you are and the fact that you could tap into an access of very wealthy founders who could pay you a lot more money for very similar advice, but you're choosing, no, that's not the path. I want to go downstream and I want to create my own thing that's not been done before. Dude, you got to give yourself a little bit of a pat on the back for that. And that's something that, yes, was absolutely founded from the same idea that your father did. And so I think that you're making the same impact. And some could argue that you actually, which you would argue is, I guess, natural considering you were given the opportunity, but you're going to amplify that impact. And that's so awesome. And it's so cool that that's something that you're focused on doing, because it's hard to do. It's very exhausting. And you still continue to build relationships along the way. So giving being a huge component. It's important to recognize the impact that you're making, because, I want you to be motivated to continue to make that impact, because we see it, we hear it, and we love it.
Well, I appreciate you guys, and thanks for that feedback loop. And yeah, was it Kobe that said rest in the end, not in the middle? Right? That's how I feel about it, right? When you say give myself a pat, yeah, I think it's important to be reflective, and totally, I'm with you. But I don't know. I guess there's just a lot of ground to cover still, and I just turned 42 last week. There's a lot we got to do still, and so I'm hopeful that we can stay healthy. Have the energy and fresh minds and great people around me to continue to do it. So, yeah.
Well, as we think about that, when you, what is a message that you can give back? We usually ask, like, what makes you a sales catalyst, right? But I think that this is a little, for you, it's this real bit of a bigger question.
My line.
Huh?
No, dude, solve problems. I actually think it does, like, solve problems, right? Work on meaningful problems, right? And that is what a good sales guy and a sales gal does. They're great at solving problems, right? They're the best investigators. They know how to uncover pain. They know how to listen for the problem. They know how to understand the impact of the problems. They understand how they can or cannot help that prospect get to the other side, right? That is what this is all about. And that transcends the sport of sales, right? That we all love.
The sport of sales. I love that.
Sport of sales, right? It's a sport. And
Sure is.
I think it's like Kevin Dorsey.
We need to make sure that we get the Alex Couture rookie card. It's going to be worth something one day.
Yeah, I'm still a rookie.
You should get one of those made. That'd be awesome.
No, man, you got to put in the work, right? You got to put in the work like you guys do each and every day. You got to get up. You got to solve problems. You got to practice and practice some more.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Wrapping it up and putting a nice, neat little bow on it, as Zach likes to say.
Put a bow on it.
Surround yourself with the right people. Make sure they got the right morals and the right values. That people feel open and honest, that they can share feedback and learn from everyone, and have the same goals to give back. and
It's-
give as much as you can.
it's so funny in that recap. You sit there and so many people will look for the keys in business through like, okay, so like, where do I offshore my money? Where do I like, how do I invest this, blah, 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 blah. Like we just literally sat down for an hour and a bit and talked about how you just try to be a genuinely better version of yourself, find people that are similar, communicate with them openly, recognize that you can teach them something and learn something. Like this is life advice. And it's just so funny how if you follow that, it changes the way you do business. But so many people don't want to look at that. They want to look at, what new product do I release or what new market do I go into? And it's like, well, maybe you got to work on those soft skills, bro.
Yup. Business, sports, life, it's
And
all the
food.
same, right? The fundamentals are the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fact.
If people want to get a hold of you, Alex, what's the best way for them to do that? And not all at once.
I honestly, I only have one way. It's LinkedIn, so I think that's the best format for anybody.
You're not going to share your cell phone number?
You get that.
Uh-oh.
But yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me, our company's website is danagrowth.com, DENA growth, GROWTH.com. Calendly links there. It's always open. It's always free. If you're a founder out there that needs help, support, reach out. That's what we're doing. That's the game. So thank you guys.
You heard
Thank
it
you,
here
dude.
first. Alex, thank you so much for joining us here today. That wraps up another episode of the Sales Catalyst podcast. Thank you everyone for listening and for joining us for another episode. I'm your host, Ari Barmapov. This is Zac Blakely, and we will see you next time. Peace.
Thanks, boys.